I was a man of status whose life was perfectly curated in boardrooms until a midnight collision pulled me into a lethal, organized scheme. Now, with a massive crime pinned on my name and professional shadows hunting us through the city, I have to decide if I'm willing to lose everything to survive. The rain in this city doesn't wash anything away. It just smears the grime across the pavement until everything looks like a reflection of a bruised sky. I was behind the wheel of my midnight blue Bentley, my mind 1,000 miles away, calculating the margins of a merger that would finalize by morning. I wasn't speeding, at least not by much, but in a city that sleeps with one eye open, momentum is a dangerous thing. Then came the thud. It wasn't the sound of metal hitting metal. It was the sickening, dull crunch of bone against high-end engineering. My heart didn't just skip a beat. It stopped. I slammed on the brakes, the tires shrieking against the wet asphalt. For a second, the only sound was the rhythmic thumping of the wipers. I sat frozen, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I told myself it was a stray dog, a piece of debris, anything but what I knew it was. I stepped out into the downpour. My Italian loafers were ruined within seconds, sinking into the oily slush. I saw her then, a heap of soaked rags lying in the gutter, illuminated by the harsh flickering amber of a broken streetlight. She wasn't moving. Panic, cold and sharp as an icicle, pierced through my initial shock. I am a man of reputation, a man whose life is meticulously curated in boardrooms and gala events. A scandal like this, hitting someone while distracted, would be the thread that unraveled my entire tapestry. My lawyers, my partners, my board of directors, they wouldn't care about the circumstances. They would only see the liability. I rushed to her, kneeling in the muck, not caring about the bespoke fabric of my suit trousers. I reached for my phone, my thumb hovering over the emergency number. My career, my standing, the decades of climb, all of it felt fragile, suddenly balanced on the edge of a blade. Just as I prepared to dial, a hand shot out from the rags and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong, calloused and trembling. She pulled herself up, her face partially obscured by matted hair. She wasn't just a beggar. Her eyes, wide and terrified, were fixed not on my face but on the phone in my hand. "Don't," she rasped, her voice like grinding gravel. "Please. If you call them, they find me. They'll kill me before the ambulance even gets here." I stared at her, stunned. "You're hurt," I stammered, my voice trembling. "I have to call someone. I have to call the authorities." She shook her head violently, her teeth chattering. "No authorities, no police. They are part of the organized scheme, don't you understand? If you bring them here, you aren't just calling for help. You're handing me over to a group that has been hunting me for weeks. They've already framed me for a heavy charge, trying to pin a massive crime on me to keep me quiet." I looked down the dark, desolate alleyway that intersected with the main road. The streetlights flickered again, casting long, dancing shadows that looked too much like men in trench coats. She wasn't just a victim of a car accident. She was a victim of something far more dangerous. "Help me," she begged, tears carving clean tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. "Hide me, just for tonight. If you call the police now, you'll be the reason I disappear, and my blood will be on your hands forever. Do you want to be an accomplice to an execution?" I looked at my car, then back at the terrified woman. I could walk away, or I could call the police and hope the truth would surface later. But something in her eyes, a depth of genuine primal fear that I had never seen in any boardroom, told me she was telling the truth. "I can't just leave you here," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the rain. "Then move," she urged, stumbling to her feet, clutching her ribs. "We have to go, now, because they're coming, and if they see us together, they won't just see a hit and run. They'll see a millionaire and a target, and they won't hesitate to silence both of us." As she leaned her weight against me, I heard a low, metallic click from the shadows behind a dumpster, the distinct, unmistakable sound of a slide being racked back on a weapon. She froze, her breath hitching, and she turned her head slowly toward the darkness. I followed her gaze, and my blood turned to ice. A black sedan had just turned the corner, its headlights killed, crawling toward us with lethal intent. We were standing in the middle of a trap, and I was the one who had driven right into the center of it. I didn't think. I reacted. The survival instinct, long buried under layers of expensive suits and luxury, roared to life. I shoved the woman, her name I realized I didn't even know, into the passenger seat of the Bentley, ignoring the way her muddy clothes stained the cream-colored leather. I vaulted into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut just as the first flicker of motion caught my peripheral vision. The black sedan didn't accelerate. It drifted. It moved with a predatory, calculated patience, as if the driver knew there was nowhere for us to go. My hands, usually steady enough to sign multi-million-dollar contracts, were shaking violently as I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine growled to life, a high-performance roar that cut through the rainy silence like a gunshot. "Drive!" she screamed, pointing toward a narrow side street that led into the old industrial district. "If they catch up, they won't even try to talk. They have illegal weapons, and they've been waiting for a reason to use them. Move." I didn't argue. I floored it, the rear tires spinning on the slick pavement before finding traction. The Bentley surged forward, throwing us both back into our seats. I didn't check my mirrors. I just stared at the road, weaving through the labyrinthine back streets of the city. Behind us, the black sedan peeled out, its engine note deeper, hungrier. "Who are you?" I demanded, shouting over the rain hitting the roof. "What kind of organized scheme are you talking about? I'm a businessman. I don't get involved in these kinds of things." "You're involved the moment you hit me," she countered, clutching the dashboard as I took a corner too fast. "My name is Elena, and the people in that car, they aren't just a group. They are a shadow organization that handles problems for the city's elite. I worked for them. I was their accountant. I saw the books. I saw the transfer logs for the illegal substances and the payoffs to the internal departments. When I tried to quit, they didn't just fire me. They framed me for a heavy accusation, trying to bury me under a massive legal weight so I'd never see the sun again." I swerved, narrowly avoiding a parked truck. The black sedan was gaining. They weren't just following, they were coordinating. Another set of headlights flickered on, blocking the exit of the alley ahead. We were being boxed in. "There's no way out," I yelled, panic rising in my throat. "They've got us trapped." "There's a warehouse," Elena said, her voice frantic but oddly focused. 4 blocks down on the left. It's a dead end, but there's a service hatch in the back leading to the old sewer tunnels. If we ditch the car, we might make it." "Ditch the car?" I glanced at the Bentley, my prized possession, my status symbol. This car cost more than most people make in a decade. "Then choose," she shouted, pointing ahead. The car blocking our path had stopped, and 2 figures were stepping out. They weren't police. They were dressed in dark tactical gear, and the way they held their weapons, silent, professional, sent a jolt of terror through my chest. One of them leveled the illegal firearm directly at our windshield. I didn't think about the car anymore. I slammed on the brakes, sliding the vehicle sideways until it blocked the alleyway, creating a makeshift barricade. I kicked my door open. "Run!" I roared. We sprinted toward the warehouse, our lungs burning from the cold, humid air. Behind us, the sound of shattering glass filled the night. They were shooting at the Bentley. A bullet pinged off the metal of the trunk, the sound echoing like a knell. We reached the loading bay, a rusted, half-open door. I squeezed through first, grabbing Elena's hand and hauling her into the pitch-black interior. Inside, it smelled of stale oil and rot. I pushed a heavy metal pallet against the door, my fingers raw and bleeding. Outside, footsteps approached, heavy, deliberate boots crunching on broken glass. They were searching for us. "We have to go deeper," Elena whispered, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "The tunnel is just ahead." We scrambled over crates and debris, guided only by the faint light filtering from the street lamps outside. We reached a heavy iron grate set into the floor, the hatch. I pulled at the handle, but it was rusted shut. I braced my legs and pulled with everything I had, my muscles screaming in protest. With a screech of metal, it groaned open, revealing a dark, damp void. Suddenly, a red laser dot flickered across the wall of the warehouse, dancing toward us. Then a voice boomed from the entrance, cold, synthetic, and utterly devoid of mercy. "We know you're in here, Mr. Sterling. You've made a very expensive mistake today. There's no point in hiding. The internal service verification team is already on their way, and they aren't here to protect you. They're here to finish what we started." My blood went cold. They knew my name. They knew exactly who I was. I looked at Elena, who was staring at the hatch with eyes full of resignation. The heavy boots were now inside the warehouse, the rhythm of their steps closing the distance. We were trapped in a tomb of our own making, and the hunters were no longer hiding their intentions. As the beams of flashlights cut through the darkness, scanning for our hiding spot, I realized that the life I had known, the wealth, the safety, the status, was officially over. Everything hung on what happened in the next 10 seconds. The flashlight swept across the rusted machinery, the beams dancing like restless spirits over the piles of moldering crates. We were huddled behind a forklift, the cold concrete seeping into my bones. Elena's hand was gripping my forearm so tightly, her nails were digging into my skin. Her breathing was rhythmic, calculated, almost as if she were waiting for the exact moment to strike. "They aren't just looking for us," she whispered, her voice barely a tremor. "They're clearing the space. They want to make sure no one else is around before they finish it. They don't want witnesses to a high-profile disappearance." I leaned my head back against the cold steel of the forklift. My mind was racing, desperately trying to map out a path to survival. My wealth had opened every door in this city, but it had also painted a massive target on my back. I had spent my life building a fortress of influence, only to realize that when the real darkness comes, a mountain of money is just a pile of kindling. "How do we get to the tunnel without being seen?" I whispered back. "The light," she said, nodding toward a stack of pallets near the hatch. "If we create a diversion, something loud, something that forces them to move toward the far end of the warehouse, we might have a window." I looked at my Rolex. The glow of the dial was the only light in our small corner of the world. It was worth more than the entire lives of the men hunting us, yet here it was, worthless. I unclasped it, letting the weight drop into my hand. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "Making noise." I threw the watch as hard as I could toward the far wall. It hit a collection of empty metal drums with a deafening, echoing clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the cavernous space. Immediately, the flashlights pivoted. Two silhouettes broke away from the entrance, their boots thudding rhythmically as they moved to investigate the source of the sound. "Now," I breathed. We bolted. We didn't run. We scrambled, keeping our bodies low. We reached the iron hatch, the darkness of the sewer tunnel beneath it looking like an abyss. I dropped down first, bracing myself to catch Elena. She slid down, her landing silent. But just as I reached for the handle to close the grate, a heavy boot slammed down onto the edge of the metal. I looked up. A man in tactical gear stood above us, his face obscured by a balaclava. He didn't fire. He simply stared down at us, a cruel, satisfied smile ghosting across his lips. In his hand, he held a device, not a weapon, but a small, black transmitter. "You really thought you could just run away from the ledger, didn't you?" the man said, his voice dropping into a low, mocking growl. "Mr. Sterling, you've made a fatal error in judgment. You didn't just pick up a woman. You picked up the only person in this city who holds the codes to the vault, and we have the keys to your entire life locked away in the system." "You're not taking her," I growled, feeling a surge of adrenaline that was entirely foreign to me. "Oh, we don't need to take her," he sneered, pressing a button on the device. Suddenly, my phone, tucked deep in my inner jacket pocket, began to vibrate violently. Then the sound of an incoming call blared into the silent warehouse. It was an unrecognized number. I hesitated, then answered on speaker. "Mr. Sterling." A voice drifted from the phone, icy and calm. It was the voice of my chief legal counsel, a man who had worked for me for 15 years. "I'm afraid I have some terrible news. A warrant has just been issued for your arrest. The Service of Internal Verification has found evidence linking your accounts to the distribution of packages with illicit substances. They're coming for you, and they aren't coming to talk. Your assets have been frozen, your reputation is currently being dismantled in the press, and your home is being swarmed." The man above the hatch laughed. "You see? The system works perfectly, doesn't it? You're not a millionaire anymore. You're a fugitive, just like her." Elena grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with a new realization. "The phone," she whispered. "Give it to me." She snatched the device from my hand, typed something frantically into the keypad, and then looked at the man above us with a sudden, sharp grin. "If you want the codes, you're going to have to follow us down there. But I should warn you, this tunnel wasn't built for a casual walk, and I've already triggered a purge." She slammed her hand against the wall of the sewer pipe, and a massive mechanical rumble shook the ground beneath our feet. A series of heavy industrial floodgates began to groan open somewhere deep in the dark. Water, black, rushing and smelling of death, began to pour into the tunnel with the force of a tidal wave. The man above us panicked, stumbling back as the hatch began to slide shut under the force of the surging water. We were trapped in a tunnel that was rapidly filling with the city's filth, and the only way forward was into the absolute unknown. As the water reached our knees, Elena turned to me, her face illuminated by a flicker of lightning that leaked through the grate. "Hold your breath," she said. "The real test starts now." The roar of the rising tide was deafening, a cacophony of pressurized water and ancient grinding iron. I didn't think. I lunged forward, grabbing Elena's hand as the first surge of sludge hit us with the weight of a freight train. We were thrown against the curved, slime-coated walls of the sewer pipe, the freezing water numbing my skin instantly. The air was thick with the stench of decay, but we had no time to recoil. "Keep your head up," she screamed over the deluge, her voice barely piercing the chaotic hiss of the tunnel. I hauled myself up, my fingers finding purchase in the rough, moss-covered brickwork. Every instinct in my body screamed to stop, to find a ledge, to give up. This was a death sentence. But I looked at Elena, whose eyes were fixed on a faint, flickering light deep in the subterranean gloom, and I realized that my former life, the boardroom, the Bentley, the prestige, had been a gilded cage. Here, in the belly of the city, for the first time in years, I was actually alive. We waded through the surge, the water rising past our waists. Behind us, the sound of the floodgates closing echoed like a tomb door slamming shut. The men in tactical gear were locked out, but they weren't the only ones hunting us. Elena was navigating by memory, her movements fluid despite her injuries. She pulled a small, jagged piece of metal from her pocket, a key card salvaged from the warehouse. "If we make it to the pumping station," she shouted, "there's a manual override. We can cut the power to this entire sector. If we kill the grid, their tracking systems, the ones they use to monitor the city's cameras and internal security networks, go blind for 60 seconds. That's our window." "And then what?" I asked, my voice cracking. "We're still fugitives. They have the media, the legal system, the whole damn city convinced I'm a criminal." "That's exactly why we need to make it to the station," she countered, her face set in a mask of grim determination. "The data isn't just on the cloud, Sterling. It's on a physical drive kept in a secure terminal at the station. If we get that drive, we have the logs. We have the proof that the organized scheme has been funneling the illegal substances through your own logistics company to frame you. We have their names." We rounded a sharp bend in the pipe, and the space opened up into a massive, circular chamber. The hum of industrial machinery filled the air. The pumping station, but it wasn't empty. Two figures stood on a narrow catwalk above the churning water, their silhouettes framed by the dim, orange emergency lighting. They weren't wearing masks, and the way they held their weapons suggested they weren't just security. They were professionals, the kind who didn't care about collateral damage. "They anticipated the route," Elena whispered, stopping dead. The man in the lead leaned over the railing, a slow, malicious grin spreading across his face. "We didn't think you'd survive the tunnel, Sterling. You look displaced." I recognized him then. It was my own head of security, the man I had personally hired and trusted with my safety for the last decade. The betrayal hit harder than the icy water. "Why?" I demanded, my voice echoing off the curved walls. "Because, Mr. Sterling, you were getting too big for your own good," he replied, his voice calm, almost polite. "You started asking questions about the logistics audits. You started poking around the discrepancies in the shipments. You made it impossible for us to operate beneath the radar. So, we decided to perform a corporate restructuring, permanently." He raised his weapon, the barrel steady as a rock. "Wait!" I yelled. "The drive! You want the drive, don't you? If you kill us here, you'll never find it. She hit it, didn't she? You can't search the entire sewer system." He hesitated, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Where is it?" Elena moved before I could blink. She didn't head for the catwalk, she dove toward the massive rotating gears of the central pump. The machine was massive, a churning beast of rusted iron and grease. She jammed the keycard into a slot near the control panel, her movements a blur. "If you shoot," she roared, looking up at them, "I break the seal. This entire station floods, and the drive is pulverized. You'll never get the logs. You'll never be able to hide what you've done." The head of security froze, his weapon wavering. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic thud of the machinery. But then, a low, ominous sound began to emanate from the control panel, a high-pitched whine that signaled an emergency override. The floor beneath us began to tilt. "She's blowing the valves," one of the guards shouted. "Shoot her!" the head of security screamed, finally losing his composure. Bullets sparked against the metal railing, showering us with hot, jagged shrapnel. I dove in front of Elena, feeling a searing pain in my shoulder as a bullet grazed me, but I didn't stop. I reached for the heavy iron valve at the base of the control panel and turned it with every ounce of my remaining strength. A massive blast of steam erupted from the pipes, filling the chamber with a blinding white fog. The catwalk above us shuddered, and the sound of straining metal groaned through the air. The platform was collapsing. As the world dissolved into steam and screaming metal, I grabbed Elena's hand one last time. "Jump!" I commanded. We leaped into the darkness of the central overflow shaft, a vertical drop into the unknown. As we plummeted, the station exploded in a brilliant flash of blue light, the transformers blowing. Everything went black, and the last thing I heard was the sound of rushing water and the terrifying hollow click of a weapon being readied right beside my ear in the pitch-black void. We weren't alone in the shaft. The sensation of falling lasted only a heartbeat before the icy, churning slurry of the sewer main swallowed us whole. The impact was violent. A disorienting tumble through the dark that felt like being tossed inside a washing machine full of razor blades. I gasped, sucking in a mouthful of foul, chemical-laced water, my lungs burning, my shoulders screaming in agony from the graze. Beside me, I felt a desperate, clawing grip. Elena. She was fighting the current, her body a blur of motion in the absolute darkness. We were being pushed by the pressure of the blown valves, hurtling toward the unknown depths of the city's drainage network. I reached out, my fingers finding her jacket, and I pulled her toward the wall where the current slowed just enough for us to scrape our way to a concrete ledge. We hauled ourselves out, gasping, shaking, and coughing until our throats felt raw. The faint rhythmic pulse of the city's power grid hummed in the pipes above us. The system was trying to reboot, flickering like a dying heart. The drive. I rasped, my voice barely audible over the dripping water. Did you get it? Elena reached into her soaked tactical jacket and pulled out a small metallic cylinder. It was damaged, covered in sludge, but the blue light on its interface blinked with a weak, desperate life. I downloaded the core logs while they were distracted by the steam, she whispered, her hands trembling so violently she almost dropped it. This contains every transaction, every payoff, every name involved in the organized scheme that's been using your company as a front for their illicit shipments. If this goes public, they aren't just going to lose their influence. They're going to be buried under decades of charges for their crimes. We can't just go to the police, I said, leaning back against the cold wall, the adrenaline finally starting to ebb, leaving behind a hollow, aching exhaustion. They're compromised. The head of security said as much. The entire internal network is on their payroll. Elena's eyes, usually so sharp and predatory, softened. She looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time. We don't go to the local precinct, Sterling. We go to the press. Not the local hacks, but the investigative bureau that covers the federal courts. And we don't go alone. She pulled a satellite-linked burner phone from a waterproof pouch, the screen glowing in the dank dark. She dialed a number, her thumb steady. "It's done," she said into the receiver. "We have the proof. Meet us at the old shipyard, Sector 4, and bring the Federal Protection Unit. No locals." I realized then that she hadn't just been a victim. She was an operative, a deep-cover investigator who had been tracking this group for years, waiting for the perfect leverage to bring the entire network down. I was the catalyst she needed, the high-profile victim whose sudden, suspicious fall from grace would draw the attention of the national media. We emerged from the sewer grate an hour later, stepping out into the gray, pre-dawn light of the city docks. A black SUV was waiting. As we approached, the doors swung open, and instead of the men who had hunted us, figures in federal gear stepped out, their faces neutral and professional. My head of security was waiting in the shadows near the crane, a pistol in his hand, his eyes wide with a manic, desperate realization as he saw the federal agents. He raised his weapon, but before he could even aim, a sniper's laser crossed his chest. He froze, the gun clattering to the wet concrete. The arrest was quick, clinical, and completely without mercy. As they dragged him away, he looked at me, his face a portrait of shattered arrogance. I didn't say a word. I simply watched as the handcuffs clicked shut, a sound that felt like the final period on a long, tragic sentence. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The following weeks were a blur of depositions, televised hearings, and the slow public dismantling of the organized scheme. My name was cleared, though the damage to my reputation was permanent. The world would always remember the millionaire who disappeared. I didn't care. I sold the Bentley, liquidated my shares in the logistics company, and walked away from the high-rise office for good. I found Elena months later in a quiet coastal town, far from the rot of the city. She was sitting on a porch, the sun reflecting off the ocean. She looked different, peaceful, without the weight of the hunt on her shoulders. She stood up as I approached, a slow smile forming on her lips. "You look like a man who finally has nothing to lose," she said. "I have everything I need," I replied, looking out at the horizon. The city still buzzed with its usual corruption, and there would always be people trying to break the law, to build their own secret networks and hide behind their power. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't part of it. I had been a victim, a target, and finally, a witness. And as I stood there in the quiet, I realized that the best part of losing everything was finally being able to choose what I wanted to keep. The mystery was gone. The hunt was over. And for the first time, the future wasn't something to be managed. It was something to be lived.